Before we really jump into the topic, I'd like to do a short land acknowledgement. The way that I was taught was not just to read about the land that we're on, but also to actively consider the implications for the topic at hand. So I really invite everybody here to really engage with the concept of colonization and how it relates to the question of sexual violence, especially what it means for us here at McGill, being on the unceded territory of the Ganyangehaga and the Anishinaabe and the Wendat people. And so I will invite the different panelists now to introduce themselves. Oh, before that, my apologies. This is part of our Knock Down the Walls campaign. And this campaign is all about the rights and responsibilities and resources available for students at McGill in relation to sexual violence. As you can see, we have today's panel as well as another panel with the OMR tomorrow. We have our weekly session of trauma-sensitive yoga and a workshop with Jury Pop on the 27th. As a reminder for everybody, this panel is going to be recorded, and we will be making sure that it becomes available for people just to make sure that the information is accessible to everyone. When we're talking about sexual violence, we are talking about it in the context of the McGill policy. And so we're referring to it as an umbrella term for a range of acts of a sexual nature that are threatened, attempted, or committed towards a person without the person's consent. And we're really making sure that we are addressing the whole umbrella and all the different ways in which it can be expressed. And on that note, I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and explain what they do and what their role is in this topic. Our first panelist is Isabella Kalarikal, who is the president of It's On Us.
Hello, I'm Isabella, as Maha just said. I'm the president of It's On Us. We are a student group here at McGill with the aim to end sexual violence and support survivors on campus. Our main mission is to empower, educate, and engage our peers by hosting workshops and facilitating discussion on topics such as consent, bystander intervention, survivor support, and other adjacent topics. We also host events to educate and engage our fellow peers as well. And our next upcoming event will be our Week of Action in March.
Our next panelist is Kayla Scholson, who is also a part of It's On Us and is the VP of Programming.
Hi, everyone. So yes, I'm Kayla. I am our VP of Programming currently. So I'm basically responsible for helping to facilitate the workshops as well as other educational content. Thank you so much for being here today. And yeah.
Thank you. I will now introduce Emily Marcotte, who is the response advisor at OSVRSE.
So hello, everybody. So I am Maha's colleague within the Office for Sexual Violence Response Support and Education. And in the context of sexual violence response within the university, our role is really to be a one-stop shop. So a place where people can come, get direct support, get information about reporting, get help coordinating any sort of accommodations or safety measures that might be needed on campus. Otherwise, our office is also very involved in awareness raising and has different programming throughout the year. And this is part of that. So we're very happy to be collaborating with It's On Us for this.
Up next, we have Robin Beech, the Dean of Students. Hello, Robin.
Thanks, Maha. So yes, I'm the Dean of Students. I've been in the job about 1 year and 2 months, I think. And my job is basically to manage accommodations and anything to do with student life at the university and the interaction between students and the administration. So anything related to students in difficulty, my office can help with that. Most of the time, we're connecting students with the various resources that they need. I'm also in charge of the disciplinary process, so I oversee the code of conduct and the disciplinary officers. My role in the sexual violence process is to receive the special investigator reports from the provost. I contact the survivor for an impact statement. I identify a disciplinary officer that will handle the case. I follow up with the survivor for the outcome of the disciplinary case, and then follow up with ongoing support as needed.
Thank you. And now we have Sinead Hunt, the Associate Director of the Office for Mediation and Reporting.
Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and being part of this panel. As Maha said, I'm the Associate Director of the OMR. The OMR receives formal reports of sexual violence that are filed under McGill's policy against sexual violence. So we are a central site at the university for receiving these reports. When we do receive formal reports of sexual violence, we offer mediation and investigation services. So that's how we are primarily involved in sexual violence response at the university.
Thank you. We now have Susan Campbell, who is the Senior Advisor of Customer Relation at Housing and Hospitality Services. I think Susan may be joining us a little bit late, but that's okay. We're now going to meet Fabrice Labeau, who's the Deputy Provost of Student Life and Learning.
Thank you, and a good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for attending. So yes, my name is Fabrice Labeau, Deputy Provost Student Life Learning. That means that I oversee a lot of the central student-facing services in the university, including the Office of the Dean of Students.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Angela Campbell, who's the Associate Provost of Equity and Academic Policy.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Angela Campbell, and as Maha said, I'm the Associate Provost for Equity and Academic Policies. So in my job, I oversee many policies, including the policy against sexual violence, and I am mostly involved with the policy through the OMR, so I work closely with Sinead, but of course I also work with colleagues in OSVRSE and with the Deputy Provost, Fabrice Labeau, to ensure a coordinated pathway for the application of all parts of the policy, and I also oversee the reports from our investigators once a special investigation has been completed.
So thank you to all our panelists for being there. We're very happy that you were all able to participate. I'm sure you will be able to provide a lot of very important information for students here. And on that note, I would like to invite It's On Us to begin with the questions.
Before we begin talking about what response processes look like, a concern for students has been how sexual violence is understood or addressed in the context of power dynamics between students and teaching staff. Can you speak to how power dynamics are accounted for in the policy against sexual violence?
I don't know who wants to answer that question.
I'm happy to go. I wasn't sure if we were waiting to be called on, but I'm happy to start. Is that okay, Maha?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So thanks for the question. It's a really good one. This was a topic of extensive discussion and concern, particularly a few years ago. The result of those discussions is a section in the policy itself, which is actually a code of conduct. And the policy stipulates that a member of the teaching staff, and I'll describe who that is in a moment, but a member of the teaching staff cannot initiate a romantic or intimate relationship with any student under their influence or authority or with whom they're collaborating. And a member of teaching staff includes all instructors, so whether they're tenure track or not. It also includes coaching staff. So essentially the kind of summary of the rule is that if there are two people and one of whom is an instructor and the other is a student who is learning from that instructor or professor, It is not permissible for the instructor to begin a romantic relationship with the person under their authority. We also in that policy included a presumed disciplinary response. So if it's found that a member of the teaching staff begins a relationship with someone under their authority or their influence, then the presumed application of a disciplinary measure is a suspension without pay, which is actually a pretty serious disciplinary measure. It cannot go all the way to termination, but we apply the principles of employment law to go with the gradation of sanctions or the severity of the offense. So I think that's really one of the major things that's been done to address the issue of power dynamics, is to essentially put a prohibition on such relationships from being established or formed, particularly when there's a direct connection between the professor and the member. And the other thing that has been done is not only in connection with the policy, but also in connection with our educational efforts. So you'll know if you've completed the It Takes All of Us modules that there's a special section, and it's a little bit different for the staff members, but speaks specifically to the notion of power relations and how power dynamics can impact or vitiate consent.
Thank you very much for that answer. Do any of the other panelists want to also add something, or?
I think that was super well explained. Thank you so much, Angela, and for setting that context for us of what sexual violence is and what power dynamics are. The rest of our questions are really focused on processes so that people can really understand how the sexual violence policy is actually applied in cases of sexual violence response, how we're all involved in that response. That said, if any participant has questions, there is a Q&R option. So you can ask Maha directly, and we will add those questions as we go. So I will start by looking at the reporting process. So I'm going to ask Sinead to speak for the Office for Mediation and Reporting. So people really want to know how to initiate a report. So could you describe the step-by-step process of filing a report of sexual violence?
Sure, that's a great question. So the typical pathway, I would say, is that someone will go ahead and book an appointment with the OMR. To book an appointment with the OMR, you can email us at omr@mcgill.ca. We also have a function on our website where you can book an appointment directly at a time that is convenient for you. You can book a 30-minute appointment or a 45-minute appointment. So that's typically the first step. Another way, though, I will say, is we have a web form also available on the website. So that's a way to reach out to the OMR. You don't have to book that appointment, but you can say, I would like to speak with someone from the OMR, and we will get in touch with you and we will set up that appointment for you. Once that appointment is booked, then we will meet online or in person, depending on COVID restrictions and the person's preference. And when we meet, we will have a confidential conversation, and the goal of that conversation is really to give the person who has contacted us information about how to file a report, what the reporting form looks like, what information is required to file that report, and then we talk about what happens after filing a report. So we want to give everyone that information, because ultimately the decision about whether to go ahead and file a report through McGill's policy against sexual violence rests with you, rests with the person who is reaching out. During that conversation, we're also going to look at whether there are any immediate risks we should be aware of, whether any immediate measures should be put into place. We're going to ask if any accommodations are needed throughout a reporting process or filing a report. If the person has not been connected with OSVRSE, we can facilitate that connection if they wanted, or connect them with another McGill support service. After that, we can send the person the reporting form, we can share it in the meeting itself. It's also available on the OMR website. So if someone has questions, they can talk, we can answer them. The other thing we like to connect the other McGill resource we like to connect students to is part of the Legal Information Clinic at McGill Student Advocacy. So there's the support piece. I think OSVRSE is a super helpful resource. There's also SACCOMs, there are other resources. But in terms of getting advice and having an advisor through a reporting process, student advocacy plays a really important role too. I'm going to stop because I just want to make sure, Emily, because I can keep going what happens after, but I just want to stop and see, should I clarify any information at this point or keep going?
I think that's good for now. I mean, we have lots of questions about reporting, so you will keep getting called on. Isabella, did you want to go next?
Sinead, this might be a follow-up to your answer, but what kind of information or what kind of information or evidence do people need to provide to file a report?
Super great question. So to file, and this is something I think it's important that we try to be as transparent about, because I think people have big reservations about the energy that goes into completing a reporting form, the energy of being involved in a reporting process. So we try to say no evidence is required at the outset of an investigation process. So, sorry, I should say no evidence is required to complete a reporting form. We basically, if someone is coming forward with a reporting form and they are comfortable with not being anonymous, so they are comfortable with sharing their name, their contact information, they would put that on the form. They would put information about who the respondent or respondents are. And then we ask for a brief description of the incident or incidents of sexual violence. So a brief description means approximately when did it occur, where did it occur, what happened, who was present, but we're not asking for extremely detailed information, because if there is an investigation, that is the point where the person will really be, they will have all the opportunity to provide any evidence they want to provide. They can provide the names of potential witnesses, but just to request an investigation or mediation, you don't need to provide a huge amount of information.
Thank you so much, Sinead. And to keep you going on that role, we have a lot of questions in our office about what a McGill context means. We have a lot of people who know that they can only file a report within McGill if there's a McGill context to the incident of sexual violence. Could you clarify what that means for everyone?
Sure. So there are, I would say essentially, there are three main ways to establish university context. So the first is perhaps the most obvious. So it's something that occurred on campus. So that is generally going to be within the university context. The other way of establishing university context is, did it occur within the context of a university-sponsored activity? So this has the potential to bring in things that happen off context, but under the umbrella of a university-sponsored activity. The other way of establishing university context is there a likelihood that what occurred is going to spill over on campus? So the behavior may have occurred off campus or maybe online in the cyber realm, but it is likely that there will be some kind of spillover that might be in terms of risk, it might be in terms of affecting someone's learning or working environment. So those are the main things, but Angela, Fabrice, Robin, they might have something to add here as well.
Not from me, that's so comprehensive. Thanks, Sinead.
I agree, that was perfect.
And then I also have a question. What resources are available to a student filing a report?
So it's not standard in the sense that we offer a standard support package, but the information we give is the same. So we can directly connect that student if they want, or they might choose to take up support later. But what it looks like is essentially, when we receive a formal report, we do an assessment of, is there an immediate risk to this person or to another member of our university community? If there is, we will contact the appropriate university authority. So it might be the associate director in residences. We might be coordinating with OSVRSE. We might be in touch with Robin, whomever that is, to put in measures to make sure there's no ongoing safety risk. So that's context specific. Again, something that's context specific that we look at the time of a report is whether any accommodations are needed to facilitate that person's ability to fully participate in the reporting process. So, for example, do we need to look at maybe changing a course section, or do we need to look at changing maybe a work location? It really, that's driven by context. But what we also always tell a survivor or a reporting party is there are support services available. OSVRSE, of course, we always try to connect them with OSVRSE if they haven't been connected already. There are other support resources. And then I mentioned this earlier, but also if they are interested in having an advisor, then we can help and again directly connect them with student advocacy.
Thank you, Sinead. This is the last question we have about how to initiate reports, or how that process works. And this might actually be for a bit broader in terms of the panelists who could be involved in answering. So we've had a question quite a bit about whether McGill has considered using an online reporting platform so that people could report more anonymously that way. So Sinead, I know you talked about, people being able to report through a form that you have online, but I don't know if there's anything you can add to this more specifically, or if anybody else would like to jump in.
Well, I'll just say, so it's not possible to report online. So we should be clear about that. We do have a web form, but it's really a way to contact the OMR. And we try to be very clear, it's not a way to submit a formal report. So it's helpful. This web form, I find it to be helpful because sometimes people aren't sure they want to contact the OMR, so they feel maybe a bit safer writing a little bit about why they're thinking of reaching out, and then we can say, absolutely, this is the right place. Here are some availabilities to meet, or we can say right from the outset, let me connect you here because this is not the right place. But in terms of online reporting, that's not something that's available right now. Yeah.
And then Sinead, can you explain what the mediation process looks like, or what you might find for people who have that in mind?
Sure. So the mediation process I guess, first of all, I'll say it's a voluntary process. So, and it's also so generally, I will say mediation is a voluntary collaborative process. There's no one size fits all. It's very flexible. There is a presumption that in our cases of sexual violence, if someone expresses an interest in mediation, the default model of mediation is what we call shuttle mediation, which means that all communications go through the mediator, who speaks separately with each party. So they don't do the traditional sit-down face-to-face mediation. However, if the survivor is interested in coming together at the same time at a place with the respondent, we can talk about that. But that's not the presumption in our sexual violence cases. With mediation generally, the goal is to is not for the mediator to say, okay, I hear this from you, I hear this from you, here's what I propose. That's really not the goal of mediation, but rather the goal is to facilitate communication around the issues, to provide space for each party to be heard, and to try keep the dialogue moving forward in a productive, respectful way. It has to feel safe. So it's a very, it's a process that requires quite a lot of engagement, a lot of checking in by the mediator with each party step by step to make sure everyone is okay. Again, I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to stop, but if you have questions or want me to clarify, let me know.
Sure. So a question that we've been asked a lot is if you could describe kind of a bit of what the investigation process itself looks like.
Yes, so the investigation process is a fixed model in the sense there are various steps to be taken and there are timelines that need to be respected. So once a formal report has been submitted, we do an initial review, we make sure it falls within the jurisdiction of the policy, we do the assessment of immediate measures, accommodations. It is sent then to an external special investigator. They are then charged, their mandate is to lead that investigation process. So they are at arm's length from the university. So they will contact the survivor or the individual who has submitted the report. They will ask to set up a time to meet with them. They'll review the allegations. They'll make sure that it's really complete. They'll ask for more details, any evidence. Then the reporting form is sent to the respondent. The respondent is asked to respond in writing. The respondent will also meet with the special investigator, can also provide evidence, the name of witnesses. The investigation will typically take 90 days or less. At the end of the investigation, there is a written investigation report, and the written report is provided to all the parties. It also goes to the provost at the same time. So the parties will know, they will have a very clear understanding of what evidence, the totality of the evidence, what was considered the most compelling and persuasive, the investigator's analysis, and they will have the conclusion in that investigation report. After that, the provost reviews the investigation report and writes a final decision letter, which is sent to the parties so they know what is happening next, if anything, depending on the conclusion of the investigation.
Thank you so much, Sinead. So I'll maybe add here, we know that, especially for students, right, 3 months can seem like a really long time because it's the length essentially of a semester. So we do work really hard to make sure they're connected to resource services, as Sinead mentioned, whether it's through OSVRSE, through SACOMs, or other available resources that might be there, so that people can process all of the emotions that come up with that, because it can be demanding, right, to have to write out what happened, to have to read. So we want to make sure people are well supported through that. I'll maybe add that through that time, we also make sure people have accommodations with their academics if necessary, and also in residences. So if there's a case that involves 2 resident students, making sure that there's distance or separation. And a very important element here is that the notion of McGill context does not apply if somebody experienced a situation of sexual violence, but is not looking to report. So if they want support, if they reach out to us, we're not looking at, did it happen within McGill? Do we have disciplinary authority? We're really just starting with what kind of support that person needs. So is it a place to talk? Is it a place to figure out their academics, to figure out their work context, to talk about reporting, what those outcomes would be like, what they would need in place, or to have other kinds of safety measures, even if they choose not to report? So maybe on that note, I'll ask some of our other partners to speak to what that might look like. Robin, I'm looking at you first because you're very involved in making sure there are safety measures if people decide not to report. Could you address how that
Absolutely.
works?
There are specific considerations. The moment that we hear a survivor has made a disclosure, as Sinead pointed out, we take very seriously the impact that has on the survivor and their immediate circumstances. So there is an article under the Code of Conduct, 21A, that is not a disciplinary sanction. It's an immediate interim measure that can be put in place that will require the respondent to cease and desist communication. So no emails, no conversation, no personal contact, no contact through a third party. That is initially for 5 days, 5 working days, so that's a week. It can be extended for 10 days. Beyond that, it would need approval from the Committee on Student Discipline. I can talk about that later if we need to. Article 21B is exclusion from a physical space. So for example, as Emily pointed out, if the 2 students involved are both in residence, it could be that the respondent is excluded from residence, so they cannot physically be there. This is not a disciplinary measure, but it's a short-term requirement to make sure that people are safe. Beyond that, if there is no reporting and the survivor is not interested in going through an official process, we can use something called a voluntary agreement, which is, again, not disciplinary. It doesn't even have to come under the Code of Conduct. It's simply a statement that the respondent would sign agreeing to certain conditions. And they can be negotiated through me between the respondent and the survivor so that the survivor is clear on what the respondent is agreeing to. And that may be not going to the library. That may be avoiding certain places at certain times, not communicating, those kind of things. So there are official and unofficial ways of keeping the communication and the interaction between 2 people apart.
Thank you so much, Robin. And I mean, you gave such an extensive answer in terms of what that looks like via academics, but also in residences. I don't know if there was anything to add to that, if some of the other panelists wanted to jump in. I think you covered it all, though. So let's keep moving. Maybe let's, yeah, Isabella, you go ahead, sorry.
Once the investigation process has concluded, if the respondent is found responsible, what are the potential outcomes and what does that mean for the complainant?
Maybe I should answer that because it falls under the Code of Conduct. So the special investigator will conclude whether there was sexual violence or not. That is done independently of the university. And we do not challenge that decision. We do not reinvestigate any of the evidence. We take what the special investigator says and we work with that. So if the special investigator says that there was sexual violence, then under the Code of Conduct, 2 of the options for the decision are admonishment and a reprimand. Both of those confirmed that there was a breach of the code. An admonishment may come with sanctions. It's a record maintained in my office. It may come along with conduct probation. So if there is any future breach of the Code of Conduct, then my office can confirm that there was a previous incident. So a second incident would be taken much more seriously. A reprimand is a permanent record, which means that if in the future a student requests a good conduct report from the university, for example, if they want to join the medical profession or become a police and join the police force. Quite often there will be a good conduct check. We cannot release confidential information about a student, but we can confirm that a student has a good conduct record. And if we cannot confirm that, then people interpret that knowing that we are not able to confirm that. Those are the decisions regarding the disciplinary case. The sanctions that come on top of that would be conduct probation, as I mentioned before. There could be an imposed cease and desist communication so that you are not allowed to speak or communicate with the survivor. There could be exclusion from residences or other parts of the university. Could go all the way up to expulsion from the university, that the student is gone and is no longer allowed to be at the university anymore. All of those things are disciplinary outcomes that can be imposed on the respondent. If the respondent is found not responsible, so there is no finding of sexual violence, then there is no right for the university to impose anything on the respondent, but we can certainly ask for a voluntary agreement to try to put in place measures that make both parties comfortable. So it may be that even though there was no finding of sexual violence, there still need to be measures in place to keep the two parties apart. That can be done through a voluntary agreement. In either case, the survivor will be told what the outcome of the disciplinary decision was, whether it was admonishment or a reprimand, and what the sanctions were, particularly if it involves the survivor. So for example, if there was a finding or an imposition of a no contact order, then the survivor would be told that specifically because they need to know that information. And I believe there were...
Oh, sorry, Robin.
No, go. I believe there were changes recently. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. Angela could probably speak to this much better than I can. But there were changes recently in the Quebec legal framework that makes it much more clear what can be told to the survivor after such a...
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I was just going to add a little bit from the perspective of what happens if the person who's the respondent named in a report is not a student, but a member of faculty or staff. So it's very similar to what Robin described, in that the investigator's report always goes to the provost, and if there's been a finding of sexual violence in the investigator's report, then the matter gets sent to the appropriate disciplinary officer. So for students, that's always Robin. If it's staff or faculty, though, then it's either, in the case of a staff member, it's human resources, and in the case of a faculty member, it's the faculty dean. And the outcomes of the disciplinary process are, there's 3 potential outcomes only, so there's a smaller range than Robin described for students. So the options are a letter of reprimand, a suspension without pay, or termination. We've seen all 3 of those types of outcomes in the cases that have been decided under our policy. Sometimes the disciplinary measures are coupled with what we call administrative measures, and that's a measure that gets put in place as a matter of trying to make sure that the conduct does not repeat itself. So it can be things like education. It can also be things like particular requirements to not be in the, similar to what Robin described, to not be in contact with or physically proximate to the survivor. Of course, in a workplace, the considerations are a little bit different than for students, because the students are on campus usually for a set number of years, whereas employees can be on campus for a very long time because it's their workplace. So the coexistence on campus might last for quite a long time. And then in terms of what can be relayed to the survivor, so Robin mentioned that there has been a change to the legal framework, and indeed, so the Quebec law is changing so that after a disciplinary result is imposed, the survivor can be informed of that. So that will come into effect, I believe it's the end of the year, but I also just got a communication this morning with Sinead that it might actually be the 2023. So we have to look at that. Sinead, you might have, there was messaging on this morning, so I'm not sure of the exact time frame. But essentially what the government has recognized the importance for survivors to have that closure, to know what disciplinary outcome was imposed on the respondent. So under a promise of confidentiality, so the survivor will not be entitled to share that information, but the survivor will be informed as to what disciplinary measure was imposed on the respondent, and that's true for respondents who are students, staff, or faculty.
Maybe I can jump in with one tiny correction. I'm not a disciplinary officer, but I oversee disciplinary officers. So typically the report comes to me and I identify a disciplinary officer to handle the case. And I typically work with them to find a resolution.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Angela, for your insight. Now I'd like to ask questions about after the investigation process is done. So why is the McGill community at large not informed of the outcome of an investigation and the disciplinary actions if the respondent is found responsible?
So maybe I can start an answer on this, and maybe Angela will want to complete. At a high level, we are bound by a lot of the rules and laws regarding privacy and confidentiality. So as a university, we cannot say a lot about what is happening, and especially at large. So we've just had a discussion about what we're allowed to say to a survivor, and you see it's already pretty restricted. And we're looking forward to some advances there. When we're talking about the community at large, it's of course even more restricted than that. So there's really not much we can say, and of course that doesn't that doesn't help a lot when there's rumors in the community about a potential case have been taken place, but that we're bound by all these confidentiality and privacy reasons, as not just because we are a university and it's an internal rule, it's actually external rules that apply to us in that case as a public body. So Angela, I don't know if you want to say more about this.
No, I think that's very complete. It's really a matter of our legal responsibilities to all members of our community.
Maybe I can jump in a little bit. That one thing that is most important about the sexual violence policy is that it's considerate of the survivor and what the survivor wants. So if the university took a decision to release the outcome of a disciplinary case, that would put the survivor front and center again, in a situation where the survivor may not want to be out in public that way. So it's not simply one side or the other, it's to protect both sides.
Thank you for those complete answers. I think this is our last question with regards to confidentiality. So Angela, you mentioned this earlier that, you know, people, survivors or complainants in a case can be told certain information that they're asked not to share with others, so that they're asked to keep the process confidential as well. What we often get as a question is, can they share it with other student groups? So for example, if they were part of a process, it's completed, the person was found responsible of sexual violence, and they would like to participate in an event and make sure that that person won't be there. Can they share it with that student group? Can you maybe give context about what I'm hearing? Obviously, is that that wouldn't be possible, but maybe why not?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that we have been in discussions with some student associations that want to have information about outcomes or even reports under the sexual violence policy, because they want to make sure that anyone who's been named in a report, particularly if they've been found responsible, cannot participate in the events that have been organized by student associations. The direct answer to Emily, your question, is that the student who is the survivor cannot share that information with a student association. So if it's confidential, It's shared for the purposes of just sharing it with the survivor. The survivor can, of course, share that information with a person who is there to support the survivor. So a therapist, a physician, and I would go so far as to say that someone who's proximate to like a family member. So sometimes survivors are will share with the circumstances with their family members. Anyone who's been acting in a supportive role throughout the process can have that information, but again, they're also there's an extension of the bounds of confidentiality that go to that support person. And of course, with people who are in a therapeutic or a healthcare relationship with the survivor, they're bound by patient-client privilege, so there would be no issue there. But the short answer is, with respect to things like student associations, for the same reason that Fabrice outlined earlier, which is the duty to protect privacy, we cannot allow the sharing of that outcome or even of the fact of bringing a report to a student society.
Maybe to jump on this, it's important to realize, and not many people realize, that the student societies are different bodies than McGill.
Mm-hmm.
They're not part of McGill. So sharing with them would be sharing with a third party, with another institution. So that's why we can't do these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I would say that the survivor is also included in that. So if there was if a student group were informed of the outcome, that also indicates who the survivor is in order to protect them. And we can't release that information because it should be at the survivor's discretion.
Mm-hmm.
But the outcome of a disciplinary process, if, for example, if one of the sanctions was a cease and desist communication, and you cannot speak to that person or be close to them, that would apply anywhere while they're at McGill. So that would include a student organization. But again, the survivor is empowered with their own decision process. So if they see the respondent breaking one of those conditions, they can tell us. It's not taken out of their hands and given to a third party. So they are in control.
For those clarifications, I'll maybe add, even though I was the one asking the question, because it is a question we get a lot, but it's a lot of the work we do with people who are coming to our office for support initially, so who might be looking for safety in some way or another. And we sit with them and look at the different reporting processes, right? So whether reporting at McGill or reporting directly to a student group, or even going externally completely and going to the police, is what they might need to get the kinds of outcomes they're looking for, right? So if a student is really concerned mainly with interactions within a student group, then maybe they'll need support to be able to access those reporting policies, and we'll help them get there. So let's continue. Isabella, I'll pass it on to you.
When there has been public attention drawn to an incident of sexual violence, what can the university do if other people, not the person directly victimized or named as having harmed, feel unsafe or affected? And perhaps this is a question for Angela, Fabrice, OSVRSE, whoever feels like they want to jump in.
Maybe I can quickly start on this. So these are usually very complex situation because, of course, we're not part of the whole process that we just described, where we have discussed about a survivor reporting and support, and then we have discussed about the process that a respondent will go through. In context like that, what we're trying to do all the time is to make sure that the people in our community know about the resources, and typically whenever something like that happens, we try to publicize as much as possible the access to OSVRSE as the place where people can get support, because a lot of the reactions we will see in our community in cases like that, they're not going to be reactions of people who want to report. That's not an OMR type of situation typically. It's really a situation where people in our community need support, and so we publicize as much as we can these resources, so that despite the circumstances, people can actually talk to the right person. And move towards the kind of support they need in that case.
I think I'll just add a little piece. I think that that's exactly right. I would add that in the context of this particular survivor, of course, there's a process there for an investigation, but Fabrice is right that for people in the milieu who maybe don't feel safe, that's a thing that we've seen from time to time. And remember that it can be very triggering for people who hear of these incidences. So of course they have access to the same resources, right? So OSVRSE would be there for them, student services the same. And so those support mechanisms are there. And in terms, people often want to know, but what's the level of risk, right? And the difficult thing for us that we're not in a position where we can explain what interim measures have been put in place and whether or not there have been steps taken to mitigate the potential for harm. The thing that I would, it's very hard because students often don't feel that they can trust this, but when an incident occurs, and there are concerns because it's become an event that is known, or at least people think they know what has happened through different channels of communication, be it social media or word of mouth. First of all, the information may not be complete or fully accurate. That's number one. And number two, it's not it's very difficult to convince people that if there was a situation, like, we will take all measures we can to keep the campus safe, because it's not in anyone's interest to expose people to harm or put them in harm's way. But often there's a desire for specifics, and that's not someplace that we have permission to go. So it's very tricky because in many cases we want to allay or assuage fears or anxieties, but we are very limited in what we can share. And every one of these circumstances that we have faced in recent years, we've only done our best to be able to explain that we assess the risk very carefully. A number of people are involved in that process, and all measures that we can put in place to take precautions to avoid exposing people to harm are taken based on the information we have. So we have to be able to access that information ourselves. I don't know if that helps, but I'll just tell you that I think from my perspective, having worked on this dossier now for almost 7 years, this is one of the hardest situations we face, because we are looking at people who clearly have fear, and there's the most we can tell them is, please to believe that we're doing all that we can to protect or to maintain the security of the campus. And then there's a question about wanting the details or elaborations on that, and it's very difficult for us to be able to share that due to the constraints imposed by privacy law.
Yeah, thank you so much for your response. Another question is, are there any specific things that are being done in residence to ensure that that's a safe environment?
I can also get started on this one. So residences it's a different environment than the rest of the campus, in the sense that our students in residence, they're basically on campus 24/7, if we consider residence as being on campus. There's a lot more work that is done in residence in terms of how the students who live there are have support in different ways. So we have floor fellows that are deployed in the residences, who are supposed to be the first point of contact for our resident students, and they play a role in the atmosphere that is prevalent in our residences. They play a role also as the people to whom the survivors may actually start talking first and having first disclosure. So that's an important link for us between between the students in residences and all the rest of the support systems we have in place, and the reporting systems we have in place at McGill. Now, that being said, I also realize that when a situation arises in residences, all the difficulties we've been talking about related to the interim measures, related to the fact that there may be rumors and people may know that something happened somewhere, and the level of anxiety and fear could actually rise very quickly. It's exacerbated in residences because, of course, people are there 24/7, and so the along the same lines of everything we've been discussing, in terms of interim measures in particular, the interim measures we take, they will typically extend to residences, and the kind of separations we've talked about, they would extend to things such as the encounters that people may have in residences. So we're using exactly the same approach, but they deployed in a slightly different environment, which is basically the living environment for our students.
I'll maybe add to this to say that as OSVRs, we're very much involved in the training of floor fellows. So when they start their roles at the beginning of the new academic year, to make sure that they're equipped in responding to disclosures, that they're equipped in knowing how to report that up so that the students who disclose a situation in residences get support immediately and get their safety concerns addressed or any kind of support needs they may have. And that support with floor fellows is offered on an ongoing basis. So they get further training every January as well to make sure that they are equipped or feel as equipped as possible in terms of the environment they help create in residences, and in helping with bystander intervention, creating safer events for all of their members on their floors, and as I say, being able to respond quickly to situations, and also making sure that they're supported because they also live with the students, so making sure that they're not left alone with holding on to that information. Don't know if anybody wanted to add anything else. I think Fabrice, you gave an extensive answer earlier. I see that we had a question from a participant here regarding this distinction you made, Fabrice, between McGill and student groups and feeling frustrated, that survivors are seemingly left by themselves there. So I'm wondering if anybody can maybe expand on how McGill supports student groups in either creating their own processes or understanding what they can do themselves if there are situations of sexual violence.
Well, and so maybe I'll just get started, and I think Robin will be able to add a bit more in terms of the work that has been done with the student associations in the last few years. The legal framework in which we are is such that indeed our student associations are distinct entities from the university, and there's good reasons for that in terms of independence and all that. But it also means we can't just transfer stuff one way or another. We can't just send the confidential reports to student associations. The other way around, I don't think that the student associations want to send to the university confidential reports related to sexual violence. So that hinders the flow of information, I would say. That being said, I don't think anybody would want that this kind of information be shared with outside informations with too much ease. So I think there's a good reason why these limitations are in place, and I realize it can be frustrating. Over the last few years, the different student associations have developed their own internal rules, and I know that the previous dean of students and had been working quite a bit with the student associations to guide them through this process, to make sure that the rules they put in place are also fair policies that at the same time are survivor-centric, but also respect the rights of all the students in the association. I don't know, Robin, if you have more details on more recent perspectives there.
I believe there's an ongoing discussion with AUS at the moment. I can't give any more details than that at the moment. The discussions are still ongoing. Maybe I can clarify a little bit on one of the previous answers I gave. By saying that the sharing of information with student groups so that students would not be banned from student groups, for example, and saying that the survivor is the one who has the choice to tell us when a respondent has breached an agreement or an imposed sanction of remaining distant and no communication. That is by no means leaving anything up to the survivor. we have a lot of resources in place that will support the survivor. For example, if there was an interaction between a survivor and a respondent that broke a specific sanction, then who should be in charge of enforcing that? Security should. We can call security, they can escort the person away. It should not be other students on campus who enforce that. So we do have a lot of resources in place to help the survivor. And after going through something like this, I'm not an expert, Emily and Maha can comment on this, but there's a strong feeling of disempowerment, of having things taken out of your control. So it by no means leaving things up to the survivor. It's a question of us being there for the survivor. The survivor needs to tell us when they want us to do something, and we will do it. So it's not putting the responsibility of protection on the survivor. It's allowing the survivor to tell us when they need us to do something. I'm not sure if that made it any clearer or not.
Thank you for that clarification, Robin, because I know we haven't spoken about security at all, but of course they are one of the main partners involved in sexual violence response on campus. Now I see we had a question earlier too about, Angela, what you talked about in terms of power dynamics with regards to students and teaching staff. And somebody was wondering about the inclusion of TAs in that discussion. So I'm wondering if you could walk through maybe how the policy was developed and how it gets reviewed.
So is the question how the policy, like what was the process for the policy development and its review process, or is it specifically about the TAs?
It's specifically about the TAs, but I think it's this impression TAs were not involved at all in that discussion. So I think maybe a broad answer about policy development can help answer that question.
Okay, sure. So the policy itself came into existence in 2016, and then it was very, very substantially reviewed in 2019. That was a very long and elaborate process that involved stakeholders from across the campus community. So Emily, you were involved in that, as was Sinead. And it was basically a series of meetings with that stakeholder group every 2 weeks. And I would say that this issue, not TAs, but the issue of professor-student relationships was probably the hardest issue to deal with. That one was very tough, and so was the issue of sharing information to survivors after the disciplinary measure was imposed, because there was a clear desire on the part of the community of students who were focused on supporting survivors to have more information relayed to the survivor after an investigation. And so we were a bit stuck because it wasn't, well, not a bit stuck, we were very stuck because of the constraints that we were operating within. And the clear interest, which is understandable, on the part of the community of advocates for survivors. So as mentioned, the piece on confidentiality has been loosened somewhat due to legislative changes. The piece on the professor-student relationship was addressed through the code of conduct, which deals with romantic and sexual relationships in the policy. TAs were viewed as in a very distinct relationship with respect to students. So we have a carved out exception for TAs under that policy. The reason is, although TAs do hold relationships of authority and influence over students, it's just not the same thing as somebody who is themselves not a student and in a position of who's in a primary role at the university is as an employee, whereas a TA's primary role at McGill is as a student. In the current year, the policy will be looked at again. Some changes will have to be brought to it, particularly to reflect the changes in the law that are coming into force shortly. And so when that process happens, we'll be convening the same people who, well, not the same people, but the same stakeholder groups. Of course, representation will have turned over, particularly for the student groups, because the student reps will have changed over time. And the members of the groups that are represented in those discussions are themselves spelled out in the policy. So the policy stipulates who is a member of the group that reviews the policy on a regular basis.
Thank you, Angela. So Maha, I'm going to pass it back to you. I am by no means an expert in WebEx. It is not my usual platform, so I'm not sure if there are other questions I may have missed that have come in.
So no, these seems to be all of the questions that we have received through the WebEx. So I want to thank all of the panelists for their wonderful responses, for participating in this panel. If any of you have any last comments that you want to make before we end this, feel free to share them
I
out.
think one comment I would make is that there is no right thing to do in any circumstance. If you are connected with one office and you don't feel that you're getting what you need through that office, talk to another office. If you feel that you're not getting the support you need, ask my office. We can put you in touch with people who can give you support.
Thank you for that.